Berlin, July 1940. The champagne flowed freely through the Reich Chancellery as Hermann Göring raised his glass before assembled Luftwaffe commanders. France had fallen in just 6 weeks. British forces had evacuated from Dunkirk in humiliating retreat. All of Western Europe lay under German control. The Luftwaffe will bring England to her knees within weeks, Göring proclaimed, his medals glinting under crystal chandeliers. Give me 4 days of good weather, and the RAF will be annihilated. 4 days. He spoke with the absolute certainty of a man who had never failed. Reich Marshal of the Greater German Reich, commander of the most powerful air force ever assembled, architect of Germany's lightning victories. 4 days seemed generous, almost cautious. What Hermann Göring said in those crucial summer months of 1940, his promises, his calculations, his certainty would reveal not military genius, but a fatal disconnect between ego and reality. Before we dive into this story, subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now relax, grab your coffee, and enjoy this true story. The Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat, July 16, 1940. Göring arrived in full regalia, his specially designed uniform dripping with decorations. He had requested this meeting personally, eager to present his plan for finishing the war. Hitler listened as his most flamboyant commander outlined Operation Eagle Attack. The British have perhaps 600 operational fighters, Göring explained, spreading reconnaissance photos across Hitler's desk. We have over 800 aircraft. The mathematics are simple, my Führer. We will destroy their airfields, eliminate their fighters, and achieve total air superiority within 2 to 4 weeks. Hitler studied the photos. And if we fail, Göring's laugh filled the room. Fail, my Führer, the Luftwaffe has never failed. Poland fell in weeks. France collapsed in days. The British are an island nation dependent on shipping. Without air cover, they will starve. Without air cover, invasion becomes inevitable. They will negotiate before September. The confidence was infectious. Göring had earned his reputation. His pilots were combat veterans. His aircraft had proven superior in every engagement. The numbers supported his assessment. Britain stood alone, battered, its army evacuated from Dunkirk without heavy equipment. How long until you're ready? Hitler asked. Give me until mid-August to position forces, Göring replied. By September, London will be begging for terms. Hitler approved the operation. Göring left the Berghof convinced he had just been authorized to win the war single-handedly. He would prove the Luftwaffe could do what the German Navy could not, bring Britain to surrender without a costly amphibious invasion. But in that moment of supreme confidence, Göring had made his first critical error. He had promised a timeline based not on careful analysis, but on his unshakable belief in Luftwaffe superiority. The promise would become a prison. While Göring celebrated in Berlin, British radar stations tracked every German aircraft crossing the Channel. Fighter Command headquarters outside London. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding studied reports with growing concern, but not panic. He had advantages Göring either didn't know about or refused to acknowledge. First, radar. The British had constructed a chain of early warning stations along their coast. German intelligence knew these existed, but fundamentally misunderstood their importance. Göring's commanders believed radar was primitive, easily overwhelmed. Of marginal tactical value, they were catastrophically wrong. British radar could detect German formations 100 miles away, giving Fighter Command precious minutes to scramble interceptors and position them optimally. What the Germans saw as scattered defensive reactions were actually coordinated responses guided by technology they didn't fully comprehend. Second, geography. German fighters had approximately 20 minutes of combat time over Britain before fuel forced them to return. British pilots fought over their own territory. A pilot shot down could be back in combat within hours. A German pilot shot down was captured or killed. Third, production. Britain was manufacturing approximately 500 fighters monthly. Germany believed British production was far lower, crippled by strategic bombing. Intelligence reports suggesting otherwise were dismissed. Göring's staff officers had compiled these facts. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Beppo Schmid, head of Luftwaffe intelligence, had prepared assessments noting British radar capability, fighter production rates, and pilot training programs. The reports sat in filing cabinets. Göring never read them. "The British are finished," he told his commanders at a July strategy meeting. "Their pilots are exhausted. Their aircraft are obsolete. Their people have no stomach for continued war. One decisive blow, gentlemen, and they will collapse." Major Adolf Galland, one of Germany's top fighter aces, sat in that meeting with growing unease. He had flown combat missions over Britain. He had fought RAF Spitfires. They were neither obsolete nor piloted by exhausted men. They were fast, maneuverable, and flown by pilots defending their homeland with desperate courage. Galland said nothing. Göring's confidence was absolute, and he did not tolerate contradiction. August 13, 1940, Adlertag, Eagle Day. Göring had promised this would be the beginning of the end. 485 German aircraft launched the largest air offensive in history. The goal: destroy fighter command in a single overwhelming strike. The results were immediate and shocking, but not in the way Göring expected. British radar detected the formations while they were still assembling over France. By the time German bombers reached their targets, RAF fighters were waiting. The promised surprise never materialized. That first day, the Luftwaffe lost 45 aircraft. The RAF lost 13. Göring dismissed the losses as temporary imbalance. His pilots had been overeager, the weather had been imperfect, the British had been lucky. Tomorrow would be different. It wasn't. August 15th. The Luftwaffe launched attacks from Norway, Denmark, and France simultaneously, designed to overwhelm British defenses. German commanders believed fighter command would have to choose which areas to defend, leaving others vulnerable. Instead, radar guided British fighters to intercept every major formation. The Luftwaffe lost 75 aircraft. The RAF lost 34. In his command center, Göring studied the loss reports with growing frustration. "Where are these British fighters coming from?" he demanded. "Our intelligence said they had 600 aircraft total. We've shot down more than that already." His staff officers exchanged glances. Lieutenant Colonel Schmid cleared his throat. "Herr Reich Marshal, it appears British fighter production may be higher than initially estimated. They may also be drawing from reserves." "Impossible," Göring snapped. "Our bombing has crippled their aircraft factories. Continue the attacks. The British are on their last legs. We simply need to press harder." But privately, seeds of doubt were forming. Göring had promised Hitler 4 days. 2 weeks had passed. The RAF was still fighting. German losses were mounting. The invasion of Britain, scheduled for September, was looking increasingly impossible. September 7, 1940. Göring made a decision that would change everything and ensure his failure. Standing before a map in his command bunker, surrounded by exhausted staff officers, he announced a major strategic shift. "We will stop attacking airfields. Beginning today, all efforts focus on London. We will bomb the capital into submission. We will break British morale. We will force Churchill to negotiate." His commanders were stunned. Fighter command's airfields were finally showing serious damage. British pilots were exhausted. A few more weeks of concentrated attacks on RAF infrastructure might actually achieve the air superiority Göring had promised. But Göring's ego had been wounded. British bombers had struck Berlin on August 25th, a minor raid causing minimal damage, but Hitler had been furious. He demanded retaliation. Göring, desperate to deliver the quick victory he had promised, pivoted to terror bombing. The decision saved fighter command. With German attacks shifted to cities, British airfields were repaired. Exhausted pilots got rest. Fighter production, previously targeted, reached maximum capacity. The strategic advantage Germany had been building evaporated overnight. Meanwhile, London burned. On September 15th, now commemorated as Battle of Britain Day, the Luftwaffe launched its largest daylight raid. 200 bombers escorted by 700 fighters attacked in two massive waves. British fighters tore into the formations, the air above London filled with contrails and falling aircraft. By day's end, the Luftwaffe had lost 56 aircraft. The RAF lost 29. More critically, not a single German bomb hit a priority military target. The attacks on London were psychologically devastating but strategically meaningless. Britain's ability to resist remained intact. October 1940. Göring sat in his office at Harrenhal. His vast country estate, reading loss reports. The numbers were undeniable now. Since August, the Luftwaffe had lost over 1,700 aircraft. Fighter commands still flew. London still fought. Hitler had postponed the invasion indefinitely. For days, Göring had promised. 4 days to destroy the RAF. 3 months later, he had failed completely. His staff officers now presented him with the intelligence reports they had compiled in July, the same reports he had dismissed. British fighter production, 500 monthly. Radar capability, comprehensive and sophisticated. Pilot reserves, deeper than estimated. Every warning had been accurate. Every warning had been ignored. Why wasn't I told about this? Göring demanded, slamming the reports on his desk. His chief of staff, General Hans Jeskenek, spoke carefully. Herr Reich Marshal, these assessments were presented in July. You said they were overly pessimistic. Göring's face reddened. The British were supposed to be finished. France fell in 6 weeks. How are these island people still resisting? The answer was simple, though Göring would never fully accept it. The British had better technology, shorter supply lines, motivated pilots defending their homeland, and a commander, Hugh Dowding, who understood his limitations and fought accordingly. Göring had possessed superior numbers and excellent aircraft, but he had squandered these advantages through overconfidence, poor intelligence assessment, and strategic errors driven by ego rather than analysis. By late October, the Luftwaffe had shifted to night bombing, an admission that daylight operations were no longer sustainable. The Battle of Britain was over. Germany had lost. Hitler summoned Göring in November 1940. The Führer's anger was cold, controlled, and devastating. You promised me air superiority in 4 days. You promised me Britain would negotiate by September. You promised me the Luftwaffe was invincible. Göring, normally bombastic, sat deflated. His elaborate uniform seemed to mock him now. My Führer, the British had advantages we didn't anticipate. You didn't anticipate. Or you didn't investigate. Hitler's voice cut like ice. I have reports here suggesting your intelligence officers warned you about British radar, fighter production, and pilot reserves, reports you dismissed. Silence filled the room. The invasion is cancelled, Hitler continued. We will turn east to Russia. The Luftwaffe's reputation is damaged. Your reputation is damaged. Make no more promises you cannot keep. Göring left the meeting a diminished man. He had entered the war as Germany's second most powerful leader, the architect of certain victory. He emerged from Britain having learned, too late, that saying something is certain doesn't make it true. But the worst was still to come. Stalingrad, September 1942. The German Sixth Army was surrounded, trapped in the ruined city with no land route for resupply. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus radioed Berlin desperately. Without immediate relief or evacuation, his 300,000 men would be destroyed. Hitler turned to Göring. Can the Luftwaffe supply the Sixth Army by air? Göring, still desperate to restore his reputation after Britain, barely hesitated. Yes, my Führer, the Luftwaffe can deliver 500 tons of supplies daily. The Sixth Army will hold. General Jeskenek immediately protested. Herr Reich Marshal, that's impossible. We need 1,000 transport aircraft operating in perfect weather. We don't have the capacity. Göring silenced him with a glare. To Hitler, he repeated, the Luftwaffe will supply Stalingrad, you have my word. The airlift was a disaster. Soviet fighters tore into German transport aircraft. Blizzards grounded flights for days. On the best days, the Luftwaffe delivered 100 tons, 1/5 of what was needed. Most days, they delivered nothing. By February 1943, the Sixth Army had surrendered. 91,000 Germans were marched into Soviet captivity. Fewer than 5,000 would ever return. Göring had promised 500 tons daily. He had delivered an average of 94 tons. His certainty, once again divorced from reality, had doomed hundreds of thousands. April 1945. Berlin was surrounded. Soviet artillery pounded the city day and night. In the Führer bunker, Hitler raged at his remaining commanders. The man who had promised 4 days to defeat Britain now made one final promise. The Luftwaffe will relieve Berlin, Göring declared via radio from Bavaria, where he had fled weeks earlier. I am organizing fighters and bombers for a massive counterattack. Hold for 3 more days. No counterattack came. Göring had perhaps 50 operational aircraft left. Berlin fell. On April 23rd, Göring sent a telegram suggesting that with Hitler trapped in Berlin, he should assume leadership of the Reich. Hitler, in a final act of fury, stripped Göring of all ranks and expelled him from the Nazi Party. The man who had promised to win the war with air power alone ended it disgraced, stripped of authority, his grand certainties revealed as hollow boasts. Hermann Göring surrendered to American forces on May 8, 1945. At the Nuremberg trials, he sat in the dark, his elaborate uniforms replaced by a simple gray suit, his medals gone, his authority evaporated. Prosecutors presented evidence of his crimes, his failures, his broken promises. When asked about the Battle of Britain, Göring offered explanations: bad weather, bad luck, bad intelligence. He never acknowledged the fundamental truth. What Hermann Göring said in July 1940, his promise of 4 days to destroy the RAF, his certainty of quick victory, his dismissal of warnings, was not based on careful analysis. It was based on ego, previous success, and an unshakable belief that confidence alone could overcome reality. That certainty cost Germany the Battle of Britain. It cost 700 aircraft and thousands of pilots. It ended any possibility of invading Britain and forced Germany into a prolonged war it could not win. At Stalingrad, the same pattern repeated. Göring's certainty that the Luftwaffe could supply an encircled army cost 300,000 German lives. The tragedy is that Göring had access to accurate information. Intelligence officers had compiled precise assessments of British capabilities. Staff officers had calculated exactly what Stalingrad required. The truth was available, but Göring never looked at it. He didn't need to, he was certain. On October 16, 1946, hours before his scheduled execution, Hermann Göring swallowed a cyanide capsule he had hidden for months. His final act was to cheat the hangman, to maintain some illusion of control to the very end. But history's judgment was already written. Hermann Göring's greatest failure was not military. It was believing that saying victory was certain could make it so. His words, spoken with such confidence in the summer of 1940, became a monument to the danger of certainty divorced from truth. 4 days to destroy the RAF. It took 4 months to lose the battle, and 6 years to lose the war.